So today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin daf Samach Beis, Sanhedrin 62. And the daf is dedicated for a shmir for the Chayalim. That's all for the Shuyim. Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this is Tzara. We're going to start on the bottom of on the top of 62a, 5 lines from the top. The Gemara tells us the following. So the daf is basically going to consist. The first summary is the statement that Rabbi Zakkai made in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and when he said it, Rabbi Yochanan said, "Go take this source out of the base medrash. There's something very wrong with it." That's the first Talmud, and then that's related to what we're discussing, Avodah Zarah. And then the next Talmud is a different version of what Rabbi Zakkai said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and it's not really as related. And it's just a different version of the same conversation where Rabbi Zakkai taught something and he said, take it out of the base medrash. So the Gemara says, Tani Rabbi Zakkai kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Zakkai taught in front of Rabbi Yochanan the following: Zibeach v'kiter v'nisech v'shtachava v'helam echad. Let's say you bow down, you sacrificed to our idol, you burnt incense, or you did libation, or you bowed down, v'helam echad, with one forgetting, meaning say you didn't realize, you forgot that all of these acts are prohibited, meaning to say you didn't remember that they were prohibited until after you completed them. 4 separate acts, but you didn't remember that any of them were prohibited as idolatry. So, meaning to say all of the works, all of these were included under the prohibition of lo savdeim. And so therefore you only bring 1 sin offering and not 4. So Amrullah, when Rabbi Zakkai taught this in front of Rabbi Yochanan said, Puk tani levra. Go teach us, go take this outside. This is external. This is not authoritative. Take it out. So Amar Rabbi Abba, Hanamar Rabbi Zera, why are you kicking it out? Why are you kicking it out of the base, out of the canon? Now what Rabbi Zera said is actually, you could find the source for it in the dispute between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Nosson, which you had several times throughout Shas. You had a question, Jeff? What? That which Rabbi Zakkai said, you can source it in the dispute between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Nosson, which we had several times throughout Shas. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Havara Ulav Yotzah. So, of all the prohibitions in the Torah about Shabbos, we know that there are 39 prohibitions, but only one is listed explicitly, and that's the prohibition of not making a fire. So why is fire singled out? So this is a dispute between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Yossi tells us that it's just a prohibition. It's not a sin offering, like it's not kares or skila, and a sin offering if it's done accidentally. Skila with witnesses, kares without witnesses. It's totally different. It's just a regular prohibition. Whereas Rabbi Nosson says l'chalak yot. So the reason why it was listed is to tell us that each and every single action of a violation of Shabbos, if you forgot that it's Shabbos and you did 39 separate prohibitions, you'll bring 39 sin offerings. So according to Rabbi Yossi, who says Havara is just a regular prohibition, and that's why it's listed. So that which it says you're bowing down is also telling us that it's just a regular prohibition, and so therefore we're only going to bring 1 sin offering for all of them. We're not going to say like Shabbos that you bring 1 sin offering for each and every one. You only bring 1 for all of them. And so the as Rashi explains, the Tana de Rabbi Zakkai holds like Rabbi Yossi. The extra shtachava is not to l'chalak yatsa. It's not to tell us you bring 1 sin offering for each one, but to tell us that it's a lav and not kares, and you don't get the sin offering for its mistake. And so even though you're liable for death because it's written by skila, nevertheless, you don't get kares or a sin offering. And so therefore, he doesn't have a verse that tells us that you get a sin offering for each and every one. So why don't we say that the Tana of Rabbi Zakkai just holds like Rabbi Yossi? And so why are you kicking it out of the base medrash? So Maskef for Rabbi Yosef challenges what Rabbi Abba says. He says, Dilmad kan will come Rabbi Yossi Hasam maybe Rabbi Yossi over there says Havaro Lav Yotzas. Maybe only in that case, Rabbi Yossi is saying my Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi says Havaro is just a regular prohibition. The Nafkalei Chiluk Malachos. Because how do we know the idea? This idea in general, Rabbi Yossi would agree that for each and every, it's possible that Rabbi Yossi would agree that Shabbos, you bring a sin offering for each and every violation, and he doesn't need Havara to teach us that because he learns it out from a different source. From the fact that there's a pasuk that says about the sin offerings in general, it says in the beginning of the book of Vayikra, it says, "Davar b'nei Yisrael more nefesh kitzechata bishkaga mikol mitzvos Hashem asher lo tasen avata me'achat mehina." A person will make a mistake from all the commandments that you're not supposed to do, and he does one from these. So it says, me'achas mehina, from one from these. So maybe that's how he learns it out, and not from, and that's why he doesn't need Lusav Aroesh to teach us that, and so therefore Lusav Aroesh is just teaching us that it's a lav. The Tanya, how do we know this? Rabbi Yossi Omer v'asa me'achas mehina. What does it mean in the verse that says you do from one from these? Ba'amim shachayev achas al kulan. But sometimes you're liable for one sin offering for all your violations, and Pamim Shachayev al Kol Achas V'Achas. Sometimes you're liable for each and every mistake. Remember Rabbi Yonasan, my time of Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yonasan, or some say it's Rabbi Yonasan Bar Chanina, say that what's the reason for Rabbi Yossi? Because it says V'asam me Achas Mehena, that you do from one from these. Achas me Achas Hena Mehena. It should say Achas me Achas or Hena Mehena. Why does it say me Achas Mehena? So achas sheihena, vehena sheiachas. So sometimes you do one sin, and then you have multiple offerings, and then times you do many sins, and it's one offering. Achas, what's an example if we do one sin? Shimon, me achas, shem mi Shimon. So meaning to say, you're going to be liable for the word Shimon. And since it says me'achas, we say that even if you just did a portion of it, which is you just wrote the letters Shin Mem from Shimon, you had a question, Bill? So it means that you intended to write Shimon, but you only wrote the letters Shin Mem, which is usually in the Gemara elsewhere it says Shem Mishmuel. So you wrote the letter Shin Mem, and so you're going to be liable because that's a word in and of itself. And so Hena, what do you learn from the fact that it says Hena? That tells us that there are avos, that you bring a sin offering for each of the primary prohibitions of Shabbos. Mehena. What do you learn out from the fact that it says Mehena? That tells us that you're liable for the Tovados. These are the prohibitions that are biblical but are similar to the primary prohibitions. Achas Shehena. What is the example of one that is many? What is the example of that? That is that's Zadon Shabbos, Mishigos Malachos. That means a case where you for sure violate the Shabbos with intent, but each one of the actions you did was an accident. Meaning to say you didn't know that these were prohibited to do them on Shabbos, and so therefore you did them accidentally. And so therefore, and Hena Sheyachas, so it's many, which is one. So therefore, in that case, you're going to be bringing a sin offering for each and every one. What's many times you sin, but you only bring one? Shiga Shabbos is Dadam Malachos, where you made a mistake that it's Shabbos, but you knew that these actions were prohibited. So that's why he learns out the case that you bring a specific one for each and every one. So that's his source for it. So he does basically. So Gemara says, so Rabbi Yossi already learned the idea of Chiluk Malachos, that you're liable for each and every verse, and so therefore he learns it out from Zadon Shabbos V'Shiga Malachos, from Acha Sheihena, and so therefore he doesn't need Losavaros to teach us that. Avohacha the no nafkele Chiluk Malachos. But here, with respect to idolatry, where he can't learn out that you're going to have to bring a sin offering for each and every action from any other source, so therefore he's going to learn it out from we'll say that the word tishtachava is not to teach us alav, but it's to teach us l'chalek, and so therefore it's not in agreement with the statement that Rabbi Zakkai says. So the Gemara says, no. Why can't he learn out also that if you do different actions of idolatry without realizing that idolatry is prohibited, without realizing that all of them are prohibited, you could also learn it out from the words achas mehena, that you do one action and you're violating them. What is achas? That teaches us zevicha. That teaches us, the word achas teaches us that you're liable if you slaughter the animal. Me'achas will teach us like by Shabbos. Dim and echad, that if you just slaughter one sign, in order to have a valid slaughter, you need to slaughter two of the majority of the trachea and the esophagus of a animal. Of a bird, it's the majority of either one, rov kana, rov vesha. But by an animal, you have to slaughter the majority of both of them. So let's say you only did one sign of either the trachea or the esophagus for idolatry, you're going to be liable. Hena of what does that teach us? Avos. That teaches you're in violation for the primary ones. The slaughter, the incense, the libation, and the bowing down. And Meyena, that's the Tawados. That's a similar ones to the primary. And what's that? Shavar Makil, that if you broke a stick as an offering before it. And also May Achatz Mehena, Achashiyena, that there's sometimes you do one and you're in violation of many sin offerings. Zedon avodas kachamim, you know for sure it's idolatry, and you do that intentionally. But shigos avodas, but you don't know that these actions are prohibited. Or heina sheyachas, and sometimes you do many actions, you only did one. Shigos avodas kachamim, zedon avodas, that you forgot that idolatry is prohibited, but you know that these actions are prohibited. The Gemara is going to explain what that could be. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. You can't learn out from that. Why? Because how can you ever have at this last case? How can you ever have an accident where you don't know it's idolatry? If you think it's a synagogue and you're in a synagogue and you're bowing down, there's no intent there whatsoever. So Rashi says you've done no sin whatsoever. It must be that we're talking about a cases that you saw an idol in the image of a king. And they used to make these types of idols and bow down to them in honor for the king. But there are also other idols that they did for idolatry. And he didn't know that they were worshiping it. Usagile, so he bowed down to it. So that's also not a proof. If he thought it was the idolatry, if you just thought it's the king, it's not a prohibition to bow down to a king. It's only a prohibition to bow down to an idol. So what's the case? It's not a prohibition. It's not worshiping it. So what's right? We're talking about the statue of the king. So what are we talking about here? So he thought that you're allowed to worship the idol, the idolatry out of love or fear, and that was his shigaga, that was his accident. But the Gemara says, well, Hanicho Abaye, that only works according to Abaye, who says that it's a sin to worship out of love and fear. He says you're liable for a sin offering. But according to Rabbah, according to Rabbah says you'd be exempt. How would Rabbah explain this? It must be we're talking about Ba'omer Mutter. It must be we're talking about a case is where this person thinks that you're totally allowed to worship idolatry, and the Torah didn't prohibit it at all. And so under these circumstances, that even though there's a prohibition in the idolatry and also the worships, it's considered many actions, which is one. You're only going to bring one sin offerings. Well, if that's the case, if that's your conclusion, then you can't be, because you have a different problem. Because Tirsha Teba'amine Rav Nachman, because then Rav could have answered the question he asked from Rav Nachman. Helam Zev Mahu, that he asked about a case of where you have on Shabbos that you didn't know was Shabbos, and you also didn't know that all these things are prohibited. What would be the case there? Do you bring one sin offering or one for each one? Learn from here that you'd only be liable for one. So the Gemara says, well, so what's the problem? Well, kasha with tifshot. Gemara says, so the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, no, there's a different problem. Rabbi Zakkai can't say that this verse was teaching him about idolatry. Why? Because here, with some sins by accident, it says by the Kohen who was anointed, that he brings a par, he brings a bowl of a nasi, and by the nasi it says he brings a seir, a goat. V'yachid kispo seira, and by the individual he brings a lamb and a goat. But in the mission of Avodas Kochavim it says, with respect to a shogeg, that the Kohen Mashiach has to bring a chatas, v'shavin shebesira kiyachad. That they all say that the Nasi also brings a sayer like an individual. So we see that we can't say that this verse is talking about idolatry, and so you can't say that this pasuk v'achas mehena is referring to idolatry, because the psukim don't line up with our Mishnah in the Brisa in Avodah Zarah. So therefore, v'sula midi, and there's no way else out of it. So that's why he kicked the Brisa out. So the Gemara says, you had a question? Because that doesn't match up with the offerings that they're discussing in that pasuk. Don't match up with the offerings of Avodah Zarah, of the Nazi that's listed in the Brisa in Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara says, so therefore those psukim can't be referring to Avodah Zarah. Kiasir of Shmuel Bar Yehuda. So now we said that there's a whole different version of this discussion of Rabbi Zakkai bringing a teaching to Rabbi Yochanan throwing it out of the base medrash. Kiasir of Shmuel Bar Yehuda Amar Hachi. He says that this is the source. It says Tanakama. He says this is what Rabbi Amar Hachi Tanakame. This is what Rabbi Zakkai said in front of Rabbi Yochanan. He said Chomer b'Shabbos mishar mitzvos and Chomer b'shar mitzvos mishar. He says there's a brisa that says that Shabbos is more severe than all the other mitzvos of the Torah, and the other mitzvahs of the Torah are more severe than Shabbos. Chomer b'Shabbos mishar mitzvos and Chomer b'shar mitzvos mishabbos. Chomer b'Shabbos. Why? Shabbos on Shabbos asa shtayim me'alam echad. Let's say on Shabbos you did two sins, but with one forgetting. Meaning, say when you did both of them, you forgot that they're prohibited, and they didn't tell you until after you did both. You have to bring one for each one. Masha came b'shar mitzvos. That excuse me. This is not the case with respect to other mitzvos, where you're going to be liable for each and every one. So the Gemara says, and Chomer b'shar mitzvos, and the other mitzvos are more severe. Sheb'shar mitzvos, and all other mitzvos, shagag v'lo mitzkavin. If you did it accidentally without any intent whatsoever, you're going to still have to bring a sin offering. Whereas chayiv ma'ashein kim b'Shabbos, it's not b'Shabbos. So now let's analyze this price. Amar Mar Chomer. So we say, what is this price referring to? Chomer b'Shabbos, Hashabbos asa shtayim. Echidami. What's the case where you did two forgettings, two acts with one forgetting? If you want to say you did harvesting and grinding, and you have to bring two offerings there, and by other commandments, and the parallel by other commandments was where you ate non-kosher food and non-kosher blood. So both cases will be two. So what's the case with other mitzvahs where you're only liable once? You had two pieces of chaylev. You had two pieces of non-kosher meat. Well, the kavase gabe Shabbos, the avikatzira tzira. Well, the parallel by Shabbos is where you did two harvests. Well, both cases you'd be liable for one. So that's why he said to him, that's why Rabbi Yochanan said, get this price out of here. So the Gemara says, my kusha, why is it such a problem? Why are you kicking this price out? Maybe he did a harvest and a grinding, but this is different than other mitzvahs. Why? Because where on by other mitzvahs, if you did this, you're only liable once. So the case is, it's coming to teach us about idolatry, that if you did two separate services, even though they're two separate acts, you're only liable once. Let's say you sacrificed, you burnt it, and you poured it with one forgetting. You didn't realize that they're all prohibited. In between them. So maybe that's what it's, and we learn that from Lo Savdim, and this is like Rebbe Ami. So the Gemara says, and so therefore, why are you throwing the price out? Maybe you can establish it. The Gemara says, no, we can't say that this price is referring to idolatry, Dikatani, Seifa, but the conclusion of the Brisa says, Chomer b'shar mitzvos, b'shar mitzvos shagab l'miskavin chayiv. So, because the other mitzvos say that if you did it accidentally without any intent, you're going to be liable. But shogig m'lo miskavin b'avodas kochavim mechadami. How would you ever have such a circumstance where you accidentally worship the idolatry? Again, the same thing like I said before. If we say you thought it was a synagogue in Ishtachavalo, there's no accident there at all. A total perfect intent. Now the Chazan Darta Usagile, you thought this was a statue of the king and you bowed down to it, and it turned out to be idolatry. If you think it's a god, you're liable. If not, there's nothing. So you're saying you serve the god out of fear or love. Well, and you didn't realize it was prohibited. That it only works according to Abai. According to Rabbi says you're exempt. What would he say? So it must be a case of where you said it was permitted. But Omer Mutter. Came to Shabbos to Pater Lagami, where you say it's totally permitted, and there you have to bring one sin offering. But on Shabbos, you'd be completely exempt. Why? So but you can't say that. You can't say that. Adkan lo by mine Rav Nachman Helm ze v'zeh el chiyuvechade il chiyuvetarte pater legami lekamanda amar. So he says, yeah, there's nobody who says that which Rav Nachman said. If you make two mistakes at once, his only question is, are you liable for two or are you liable for one? But nobody says you're liable for nothing. And the Bryce that we said says you're completely exempt. Gemara says, what are you talking about? There is a source. My kosha. Why are you saying that? And Sefer B'Shar Mitzvos. Maybe the first cause is referring to idolatry, and the second cause is by all other commandments, meaning like fat and that's why it says Shagil Bo Miskavin. What does it mean he accidentally sinned without intent? Because of a roku uvolo. He thought that it was spit and he swallowed it. He didn't realize it was meat. Masha'kein came b'Shabbos the potter, but on Shabbos, if you did the action without any intent whatsoever, you won't even bring a sin offering. Why? Let's say you intended to pick up something which was removed from the ground, and you actually cut down something that was attached, you're going to be completely potter. Like Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel said, if you don't have any intent and you happen to have an adulterous act without any intent whatsoever, like we said that case, you just fall off a building, or you have your mouth open and a piece of meat falls into it, then you're going to be still liable to bring the sin offering, because you have benefit. But on Masasik Shabbos, but on Shabbos, you're going to be exempt. Potter, Shabbos is a specific idea that the only way that it's prohibited is what's called Melechas Machshevet, that there needs to be an intent to do the action. And so therefore, why don't you say that the first cause, where he says on Shabbos you're liable for each and every one, but for the other mitzvahs you're liable only once in offering? That refers to idolatry. And the second clause, which says that for the other commandments you're liable for one, but for Shabbos you're liable for nothing, that refers to just a regular sin offering. The other commandments. And Shabbos you're not liable because the Melechas Machshevet. Gemara says Rabbi Yochanan Tamei, the one mikul masnisa reisha b'chad taima v'seifa b'chad taima. Now this is what Rabbi Yochanan's position is in general, is a methodological approach. He doesn't have the Bryce referring to two totally different scenarios. One is idolatry, one is all other commandments. Rabbi Yochanan says this elsewhere. He says this, and we had this in Bamitzia. Remember, he says, whoever can explain to me in this Mishnah and Amavkid about a chavis, about a barrel, or somebody put it with his friend. Remember that case? He says, whoever can explain to me, it's on the top of the page there in 40b, then whoever can explain to me this Mishnah that goes according to one Tana, and it's not two totally different scenarios, I'll carry his shoes to the bathhouse, meaning to say, I'll bring his garment to the bathhouse. He'll have solved the big issue for me. So, okay, look, this is a little bit complicated, esoteric, but we'll stop here because Benedict Shir is in 3 minutes on the daily Mishnah. Yashakoach. Well, yeah, 3 minutes is Benedict Shir. Yashakoach.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.